Joining me now is National Advocacy Coordinator of Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty, Marc Hyden. Marc, hi, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Marc, how did you get involved with this cause?
Well, I've always been concerned about life issues and fiscal responsibility and trying to support a government that operates in a limited fashion. And for me, that's why I'm against the death penalty. It risks innocent life, costs more than life without parole, and I really don't trust the government to do many things well, especially when it comes to making life and death decisions over American citizens.
Sure. Now, you say in a lot of your reporting on your website that it's inconsistent with conservative values. Are these just the values of small government and life? Or talk to us a little bit about how you think it contradicts the traditional conservative values.
Sure. Well, it risks innocent life. This is a fallible government program. Innocent people get caught up in the mix, so there's no way that you can say that it's pro-life. And then it costs more than life without parole, and it's even led to tax increases, so there's no way to say that this is fiscally responsible. And I don't believe that if you look at a philosophy of limited government, that you can say that giving an error-prone state the power to kill its citizens is limited at all. But beyond that, if you want to look at a cost-benefit analysis, you see that the death penalty, it doesn't deter crime, so it fails on that fact. And then it's pretty harmful to murder victims' friends and family members. So this is the quintessential big, broken, expensive government program.
Sure. Now, my question is, the reason I believe that it's been a conservative stance, a conservative policy, is because it's not just about the life of this individual, because this individual committed some sort of atrocious crime, sacrificed his or her rights in doing so. It's about protecting other innocent lives, which is a pro-choice stance. So what's your answer to that? If we abolish the death penalty or repeal it in the states where it's legal, is that going to put other innocent lives at risk?
Absolutely not. You can look at the states that have repealed the death penalty, and their murder rates went down after they repealed the death penalty. There's simply no deterrent properties when it comes to capital punishment the way it's run. And you also run the risk of killing innocent people. So I'd have to have the infallibility of government proven to me before I could trust them with this program.
All right, let's talk about the innocence aspect of this. You've mentioned it a couple times, and it's actually why I err on the side of not supporting the death penalty, because there have been so many cases where someone has incorrectly or innocently been put to death. Marc, talk to us about those instances, how often that occurs, and what happens to lead to that.
Well, it's alarming how often it happens, but if you want a general rule, you can look at for about every 9 people who are executed in the United States, around 1 is released from death row because they're wrongly convicted. So since 1973, it's over 155 people that have been wrongly convicted, sentenced to death, and later released. But there have been others who were executed where there were serious doubts regarding the veracity of their verdict, and it's too late to go back and check those. But prosecutorial misconduct, as well as faulty forensics and mistaken eyewitness testimony, guarantee that these wrongful convictions will continue. Yeah,
and to me, that's horrifying, especially in our day and age where we're able to adequately imprison people who commit crimes, that it's not an issue anymore like it was at the beginning of our country, where we didn't have adequate facilities that would detain these people. They can't escape for the most part now. They're safely housed in these prisons. The idea that 155 people, like you said, have been released, and that's not even counting those who have been innocently put to death, that's extremely troubling to me, Marc. But talk to me about the costs. So a lot of people will talk about the moral aspect of the death penalty. Let's talk about the practical aspect. You mentioned before that it actually costs less to house an inmate for life without parole than it does to put them to death.
It does. So the majority, or the largest portion, of the cost is actually in the initial trial. Death penalty trials, according to a study out in Colorado, found that they're about 6 times as long as life without parole trials. And then there's an additional trial that most people don't know about, and it exists just to see if the offender can receive a death sentence, and that's unique to capital cases. And then there's the much maligned appeals process. It's very complex, it's long, and there's 3 levels of review in death penalty appeals, whereas there's only 1 level of review in life without parole cases. And in the end, they're housed on death row, which is a much more expensive way of housing people. So those individuals serving life without parole spend the majority of their time in facilities that are maximum security and general population, which is much cheaper.
No, you would agree, I assume, that the death penalty was a necessity at different points in our country, that we're just getting to the point now that it's no longer necessary to keep these individuals from harming other innocent lives, correct?
Well, I think it's very unnecessary now, but you can make an argument that it wasn't necessary at our founding, since many of our founding fathers opposed the death penalty. And it was around the time that we signed the Constitution is when we got our first prison, kind of the modern view of a prison. So we had those opportunities to get rid of the death penalty and to make it obsolete and unnecessary very, very early in our history.
All right, I want to go back to something you said at the beginning. You were talking about deterrent, and this actually surprised me. Is the death penalty not statistically serve as a deterrent for the types of crimes that you can be sentenced to death for?
Of course not. And you can look at many states. The ones that have the highest murder rates, they have often the highest execution rates, and it doesn't slow down. But you can see, which is strange to most eyes, that states like Illinois, Connecticut, New York, New Mexico, New Jersey, when they repealed the death penalty, their murder rates went down. And then there's a multitude of studies out there showing that there's simply no causal relationship between executions and murder rates.
How are you going about convincing conservatives to change our opinion, essentially, on this? Because this has been traditionally, conservatives say you got to take responsibility for your actions. You commit this crime, you're going to be justly punished for it. How are you speaking to conservatives to try to convince them?
Well, I speak at colleges, I speak at tea parties, Republican clubs. We're going to CPAC here in a couple days. We go to other conferences and work with the media. We're telling conservatives, such as myself, what we haven't heard for so long. We've been sold pretty much a lie about the death penalty working when we know factually that it doesn't. So it's about educating people and letting them know all of the failures surrounding capital punishment and how it violates our principles.
How about exceptions here? I know that a lot of times these life issues, the critics always go to the less than 1% arguments, whether it's abortion, in the case of rape or incest. But in the death penalty, are you for any exceptions to terrorists or any type of individual that commits a crime that would draw attacks or any kind of danger to the facility that they were housing?
Well, the bottom line is, if you have a death penalty in place, then inevitably you have to have a larger program in place, which means that innocent lives will inevitably fall through the cracks. I just don't think it's worth it to execute innocent people just to be able to get a few of the worst actors out there. So I don't believe it's worth it.
All right, Marc, this was a very interesting conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the show. We are...